So to set the stage for this conversation, since the end of the Cold War, the United States has stood alone on the world stage as the only superpower in what has been titled the unipolar moment. During this time, the US dollar has functioned as the uncontested world reserve currency, delivering tremendous benefits to the US government to print money and export inflationary effects to the world. Today, however, many believe that unipolar moment is ending as we enter a multipolar world, with rising powers including China, India, and Russia contesting U.S. hegemony. BRICS nations are actively collaborating to reduce dependency on the dollar and pursuing gold-backed alternatives. That's on the table and being discussed. The question is, in a multipolar world, could sound money make a return to global monetary systems? What role might gold, silver, Bitcoin, and other cryptocurrencies play in a changing world order? Is there anyone who would like to take the first stab at that? Gene?
I'd like to briefly state that really, if I were to tell the history of the world in one lesson, in a brief lesson, the people had money. Why does the dollar have value? Because of what it could buy yesterday. Why did it have value yesterday? Because of what it could buy the day before. Trace it back in time, and the dollar came from gold and silver. Trace it back in time, and then government stepped in and recognized that the way to empower itself was to take the people's money. The people have to take back their money. So in a way, I'm ducking the question. I don't want to see any other nation's money dominate the world. We have gold, we've got silver, we've got Bitcoin. Money is a network commodity. By that I mean that there will tend to be one money or two monies in the real free world, the free market, dominating the world, because everybody wants to hold the money and spend the money that everybody else wants to spend. So therefore, I don't see any problem with Jeff Deist being here for gold or anybody else here for being silver. It will work itself out. And then once the people get back their money and government gets out of the money business, then we can have the preconditions for a free society, but not until.
Daniel, you have something to add?
Yeah, I want to say that right now, gold and silver is pretty much creating a parallel economy to the fiat system. Right now, there are companies that are globally trading digitally with debit cards, equivalent bank accounts in gold and silver. Some of those companies are Glint, Kinesis. I don't want to mention Load, but they used to. But there are companies that have had trouble, right? And that's where the third-party risk, to address the person who asked me the question. But Cities for Some Money, we've also been working with 9 companies around the world to create what we're dubbing right now, we're going to change the name, Bretton Woods 2.0. We're creating a self-regulatory body for a global monetary system amongst all the gold and silver companies. We've already talked to Keith Weiner about this as well. What we want to do is create the Bretton Woods Agreement, the entire structure first, before we bring in the rest of the gold and silver industry, because we realize that we are in an electronic age. And companies like Monetary Metals that provides a yield, which is one of the biggest things that the fiat economists hit us with, is that gold and silver is a rock. I think Warren Buffett said that and a few others, that does nothing. It just sits there. Not true. You can put it to work, and you can earn a yield in gold and silver. And UPMA, Alpine Gold, Monetary Metals, Kinesis, all provide yields on your money. It just sits there, or you put it into a lease, or you put it into a gold or silver bond, and it works for you. And gold and silver has been the global monetary unit for millennia. It's just finally catching up in this century and really the end of last century, being able to transact. In fact, the first electronic transfer of gold and silver happened in the 19th century with Western Union. They just sent a telegraph saying, hey, this is how much gold is here, and they eventually sent it over. That was the first electronic transaction. It was a gold and silver transaction because we're on the gold and silver standard.
Joel.
Yeah, so I'd like to tell a quick story. as a young kid, I was homeschooled, and that does, tend to affect these kinds of viewpoints. But of course, I grew up knowing the true nature of money, the history of money, et cetera. And at some point, I asked myself, well, what happened to the money? Where did it go wrong? And over the years of kind of, looking into this, you kind of see a correlation between, like, obviously, like the capture of the money, as well as the technological upgrading of the kind of trade clearing layer of that, where when transactions started to become more digital and things, or even with paper certificates, introducing some extra counterparty risk for these things, and then powers that be who are incentivized to try to capture this and try to create more money than actually exists, for example, target those technological innovations to a certain extent, but also drawbacks, and that's where they've managed to corrupt it to where the gold-backed dollar is what it is today, right? That's kind of the transition there. And so that's kind of what got me into the cypherpunk movement, is basically looking into these ways where we can use technology that is very difficult to attack and influence from these central third parties to kind of do this. And that's kind of, unfortunately, the technology for efficient digital commerce, et cetera, was not super friendly to like actually owning your own sound money in the beginning. We're starting to get into that area now where you're starting to be able to hold your own money in your device to a certain extent and be able to use that without third parties, without intermediaries that can kind of corrupt that. And I think that as a result, just kind of bringing back to the global picture, before you had governments as the purveyors of what is and isn't money, basically, or isn't legal tender, and as the largest power structures, because again, they can attack those vectors of where people actually get to use this stuff. They can kind of get there, and as control goes back to the individual, then I definitely think that the ability or feasibility of governments to try to control the money is going to start to significantly go down. And of course, a multipolar world, of course, does offer competition and friction between governments on this, and I think that that's probably a strategic advantage in the short term, because while they're sort of fighting amongst each other for who's going to control the money, eventually it's going to be no one, hopefully. That's my optimistic take.
So let's zero in on that. I'd like to address this question to Jeff and get him in on the conversation. So, and then hear others as well. So, in this moment we're in, what do we perceive as the actual real, I guess depending on how you look at risk or opportunity, that the dollar is in danger of losing its status as the global reserve currency? Certainly we've seen the mass currency inflation, the expansion of the money supply. We've seen the sanctions policies that the Biden administration put on Russia backfiring in terms of many countries realizing that their access to dollar markets are not secure. What is the risk of, are we really in a situation where we may see in, let's say, the next 5 to 10 years, maybe even sooner, the dollar lose its status as the global reserve currency? And what is the possibility that comes out of that? Is that outcome necessarily going to be a bad thing, or where we just shift towards, I don't know, some other hostile country taking the place, China taking the place, for example, or another state actor establishing, stepping into that same void? Or is there an opportunity for sound money to see a resurgence? And with if sound money sees a resurgence, is that with state actors pushing that, or is that because the markets find a way to slip through, and we have kind of what Joel has mentioned, the possibility of no one controls the money? I know that was a multi-part question.
I mean, for starters, when you say, are we on the cusp of this, of the dollar losing its reserve status, it sort of feels like it, but feelings will get you broke quick. I mean, if I knew, I'd be out there shorting or longing or doing, buying And let's be fair. A lot of people in our communities, not you young guys, me and Gene here, but you know, very smart people like Ron Paul and Doug Casey back in the 1970s, that's half a century ago, were talking about the demise of the dollar, and it hasn't happened. And so timing things is rough. And let's not forget the dollar works really well. The French finance minister back in the 60s called it our exorbitant privilege as Americans. Because in a sense, I know some people doubt this, but in a sense it allows us to export inflation. And the whole world uses the dollar. They need the dollar. They use it to settle international trade, both at government and private, corporate level. And you may not know this, but lots of governments and pension funds and endowment funds and hedge funds actually required to hold dollars or U.S. treasuries, which we can almost view as a proxy. So I don't know, and if I had a better answer, I'd tell you, but I will say that in the short term, that certainly would be rough on Americans. Because the average American who's not very, very wealthy cannot diversify his or her paycheck or savings or whatever it is into foreign currencies or maybe emerging markets or foreign stocks or whatever. Most of us have our, whatever money we've got in our 401k or, we've got in dollars. So I think the U.S. dollar losing that status would be rough, but I think Gene's right. The world wants one money, and I think it trends towards that. It may never get there. We even had the whole bimetallism thing between gold and silver, but it does want one money, and with a global economy, it wants it more than ever. So it's just governments that stand in the way. And look, Pat Buchanan, of all people, said way back in the day, he said, after the '08 crash, he said, either we're going to have this devolution into sort of factionalism and regionalism, and this is, I think, what the BRICS is an attempt at, or we're going to have some monster, the U.S. dollar is going to fail, we're going to have some monster global reserve currency under the auspices of, let's say, the IMF or the World Bank that starts out with a basket of currencies, so where it's familiar, and maybe it's precious metals, so it doesn't seem so scary, but then it ultimately becomes a purely fiat project like the dollar. So, I mean, that question you say, I mean, that's up to 7 billion economic actors who get up every day and do all kinds of crazy things. And that's why I won't be in the Doug Casey prediction business.
Jeff is absolutely right that radical change rarely happens. If this were 1986 and we were asked, does anybody think the Berlin Wall is going to fall before 1990? We would have laughed that questioner off the stage. Jeff is absolutely right that radical change does rarely happen. Who the hell would have thought that chattel slavery could ever end after thousands of years of chattel slavery? Jeff, of course, is in the odd position of being a guy I look up to as somebody who's on the ramparts helping to introduce to the people of the world alternatives to the awful danger of fiat money. I covered the economy for many years. I can show you through simple numbers. The lockdowns, the totalitarian lockdowns, would not have been possible if the U.S. did not have the Federal Reserve printing trillions of dollars out into the market and causing double-digit inflation. So therefore, we've got to put a stop to it, and Jeff is right that we might not be able to. However, surprising things happen. We need, as Milton Friedman, I'll quote him, said, we need all those good ideas lying around because the crisis does happen, and the crisis of the dollar could happen, and then we'll have people like Jeff Deist around and others like him, like this man here, to the other side of me here, to possibly introduce people to the painful transition. Although Jeff is also right that it will be a painful transition. Clearly, slavery did end peacefully in many countries. It ended quite painfully in the U.S. So I want to grant everything that Jeff says, especially his point that he can't predict the future. We know that radical change can happen, and we want to work for it.
Yeah, I would say that radical change, radical revolution rarely does happen, right? Revolutions have happened, and when it comes to monetary policy, when you look at the history of empires rising and falling, they usually rise because they use sound money, right? Sound money is their monetary system. The Roman Empire, the Athenian Empire, the German Empire, not the German, sorry, I keep saying German when I mean British. The British Empire, American Empire, right? Nations rise because they use sound money, because they're storing their economic GDP into real money. And eventually, they are no longer the superpower of the world. Spain's no longer the superpower. Great Britain's no longer. This is just past our lifetime. We live a short time, right? And we got to think more long term. But one thing that we do know, because I'm a student of history, and I'm a student of looking at the rise and fall of empires as well, at a macro and micro level. And one thing that we are certain is that gold and silver is money. And we're not trying here at C4SM to create and destroy the dollar. What we're doing is creating a safety net for the people to put and choose through their free will where they want to put their economic energy. We were creating a parallel monetary system, not an usurpation. We're not trying to destroy the Federal Reserve right now, which I think we do need to destroy the Federal Reserve because they have caused more pain for the people than any other institution every central bank has. But there is also an economic theory that if you back any currency with at least 40% gold, it stabilizes it. It stabilizes it so it can take the impact of the inflation of those dollars. So I would posit, like as we go state by state to create this parallel economic system, that we also create strategic reserves at the state level. Next year, that's something that we're going to write, Citizen Money, to create a strategic reserve, not just a gold reserve. There's a few states that have done it. Wyoming, Utah has done it as well. I think they should put a percentage of their reserve funds, general funds, into gold and silver. But at what threshold? 10%. It's a good threshold. But I would posit 40%, right? Because one of the reasons that governments keep raising their budgets. Yeah, sure, they got greedy politicians and special interests that want their companies or their programs to get funding, but it's also inflation, right? Missouri tried to pass an inflation-proof budget where they could only spend more money based on the population growth. Well, the population growth in Missouri each year is about 1.5 to 1.7. That doesn't even keep up with the skewed inflation numbers of the federal government. Real inflation numbers, if you believe in shadow stats, is closer to about 10.5%. If you cap the government from spending 1.5%, you're creating a disadvantage for that state because they won't even be able to keep up with the inflation rate. They won't be able to keep up with the loss of purchasing power of the people's taxpayer dollars. The way you fix that, put it in gold and silver. It'll raise the general fund so that it's keeping up with at least the inflation rate of the dollar. Do I think the dollar is going to collapse anytime soon? No. I got people on my advisory board that argue against other people on our advisory board that say, no, the dollar's going to collapse. No, it's not. No, it's not going to collapse. We're still the superpower of the world. We have the biggest military in the world, and we got to finance that. That's the sign of the fall of an empire, when you have military power all over, and you got to finance it. You got to debase your currency. But is it going to be an instant financial monetary revolution? No. Do I think we're causing the spark? I think so. We're bringing back real money. We're bringing back the choice of people to preserve their economic energy so they're not broke like the rest of the 78% of Americans. And I bet you it's a lot worse in the rest of the world.
Yeah, so sort of to answer that, is the dollar going anywhere in the next 10 years? I'm not a betting man, but I would definitely bet no. I kind of see a little bit of a resurgence of the dollar for just the next couple of years because of a couple other outside factors. So first of all, in the cryptocurrency world, the stable coins, which are basically dollar representatives, are far and away becoming the most popular form of transacting. It used to be Bitcoin overwhelmingly in the early days, then that became difficult to do, and then you see like Litecoin is a very big, I would say scarce crypto that is used a lot, but then especially the last few years, everything is moving to stable coins. Square, the point of sale system you see everywhere, are debuting stable coin acceptance there. Stripe, which you use for a lot of online subscriptions like to X, for example, also accepts stable coins. It's starting to go a lot of places in the economy, and because of the sort of borderless nature of cryptocurrency transactions, we've seen a lot of this in countries with, I guess, weaker fiat currencies than the dollar. So, for example, in Venezuela, where some of my colleagues onboarded over 3,000 merchants to accept cryptocurrency in the Caracas area, that kind of became difficult to sustain, but now we're seeing as a substitute, mostly Tether, which is one of the dollar-based stable coins, is becoming popular there. Same thing in Argentina, same thing in many parts of the world. It's inadvertently strengthening the dollar in the short term. Now, as far as so that's why I would say over the 5 to 10 year time frame, I don't really think the dollar is going to go away during that time. Of course, stranger things have happened. But over the long term, I definitely think once we have created a system, a world which we have now, it exists now, where there is currency competition, over a period of time, I don't think anyone is going to want to use the currency where someone else takes 5, 10, 15%, whatever of your value every single year and just does other things with it, especially if it's just the U.S. is doing this, just the U.S. government is doing this and taking this away. And so, for example, like right now, there are, like I remember, the decades before you had the modern digital currencies out, where people tried to create like, a Liberty Dollar or whatever else, and people went to prison very quickly for things like this. Now, Bitcoin's founder, as far as I know, never went to prison because he's never publicly identified. And to me, it's it's one of the more, I guess, white-pilled things I've seen is that over the last 15 or so years, or 16 years, alternative currencies have shown up. Different U.S. states have put in legislation about legal tender reserves or whatever. Certain nation states have, at least temporarily, adopted legal tender. Whatever else, you see a lot of these things that just I thought would never, ever, ever happen in a million. I thought there would have to be wars before this happened. But it's happening, and now the rise of the decentralized digital asset space is so big, where it was probably one of the biggest interest groups that elected the currently sitting U.S. president. It gives me a lot of hope that it's the cat's out of the bag. It's too big to ignore at this point. There are still some things that could go wrong, but at this point, especially how it's like, as I tell people, like Peter Schiff got me into crypto, which is kind of it sounds funny, but it's sort of true because I was trying to use sound money as my currency, and he had a gold-backed debit card, and then it wasn't available to U.S. citizens. Good thing I have another passport. I'm trying to figure out how to use that, and that's kind of when I got into crypto because I'm like, oh, it's kind of like the same thing. I've seen a resurgence in precious metals since then, and I think a lot of that is due to the fact that the cat's out of the bag moment of cryptocurrencies has kind of gotten people thinking, wait, we can try this again. We can go back to sound money, but also the technology has gotten to where the actual trade clearing mechanisms for sound money could potentially be updated to where they're harder to crush from a centralized, government or financial institution point of view. So basically, long term, I do think the dollar is kind of cooked.
So if we go back in time to, I suppose, the period when, you go back to the 1800s and later, even as late as you read The Wizard of Oz, a big allegory for monetary policy debates that were going on in politics at the time. Monetary policy used to be a tremendously hotly debated issue in American politics, and that seemed to go away for a long time. Until 2008, 2012, you had Ron Paul perhaps as one of the lone voices as far as in presidential politics, even raising the question of monetary policy. And today we have a president who, mixed bag from a libertarian perspective in many things, but he's certainly the first president in my lifetime who seems to be at least monetary questions seem to be coming up in the conversation a lot more. And I suppose part of that is a function of the overall environment and conversation that's happening in the country, but also, he certainly weighs in on it. Sometimes it's hard to tell exactly what his coherent philosophy is on all this. he'll criticize the Federal Reserve, but not because it should be abolished, but maybe he wants more control over it, and he wants to artificially set interest rates. But then he's also freeing Ross Ulbricht, which is a great thing. He's talking about strategic Bitcoin reserves. So the question I'm getting to that I'm going to ask you all to respond at is, in the opportunity of the second Trump administration, which, it's a moment in time that will last for 4 years, and who knows what'll happen in the midterms. Maybe the opportunity for change is even shorter than that. What opportunities from under this current presidential administration for changes in direction on monetary policy exist that liberty lovers should be pushing for?
Well, I have to duck the question myself. I look forward. I'm going to hear Jeff Dice talk about Trump tonight. I don't think much is going to happen under Trump. My own scenario looking forward is that just read the 30-year, the updates of the 30-year prospects of the debt in relation to GDP by the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. They list a whole lot of different fiscal crises that could occur from the runaway spending, the debt growing faster than GDP. There is no question that will cause a crisis sooner or later, impossible to time. Again, I trapped myself in my Berlin Wall question. I doubt very much that much is going to happen under Trump. Trump clearly, unfortunately, we don't know what the actual short-term interest rate should be because we don't have a market to tell us. We've got Jerome Powell telling us, and Trump wants him to lower it. He was going to fire him. I think it's just a lot of hijinks, and it's not going to come to much. However, the long-term trajectory of the dollar is that it will be in trouble. That will create a potential crisis. The real question is, will there be enough sentiment and enough understanding to think in terms of silver, gold, Bitcoin, other cryptos as potential money that's far more stable than what government has to offer, or will some other government step in? I think the dollar is going to have real trouble down the road because the spending and the debt will not stop. So I have to look beyond Trump and say that the crisis is definitely going to happen, difficult to time it, but once the crisis happens, there will be some hope that we can return to a stable money. We can understand that the welfare, warfare, lockdown state is financed through printed money. And that was never the intention of the Founding Fathers, for the government to have so much power to print money. The measurement of a tax burden that government places on us is not what it taxes us, but what it spends, what resources it grabs from us by spending money. The more people understand that, the more people understand that we need a stable money and that money originated with the people, then the greater the hope that we can have a truly free society with a stable money. But I don't have much hope for Trumponomics in any respect in this regard.
I mean, one thing, Gene, is that there's no political will to address Social Security, Medicare, and so-called national defense. So if you're not cutting those three and drastically, which Trump cannot do, there's no political will whatsoever, then there's no way we can be moving towards sound money. And the rest of the world sees that and knows that. They know that we're not going to get our fiscal house in order because there'd be riots in the street if you tried to cut Social Security meaningfully. They'd be maybe...
But once it goes bankrupt, then you'll have to cut it.
But Trump's all over the place. He in a sense, he's a strong dollar, Larry Kudlow type. But in another sense, he's a real estate guy and a casino guy, so he knows what it is to load up businesses with cheap debt. So he likes low interest rates. He knows that interest rates have to go down if FedGov is going to service the national debt at $36 trillion. But at the same time, you've heard the term pushing on a string. I think now interest rates are unbound. In other words, there's not much more the Fed or the Treasury can do in tandem to suppress them. I think they're going to head northward. And that's just going to be the new reality. And remember our grandparents, really even some of our parents, they can tell you about 15 to 20% interest rates, and not subprime. I mean, these were normal working folks who had to get a mortgage at that rate, so it's not unprecedented. And frankly, personally, I would love to see interest rates rise precipitously, and I would love to see asset prices, including equities, fall precipitously. I think it's the only way. And if there's going to be pain, let's take it and not put it on the younger folks.
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment. I mean, I want to see a deflationary crisis happen, because it just means that we're getting rid of the currency out there that's in circulation, and it's strengthening that currency, and everything else will drop in price compared to that currency. The Trump administration, I might be a little bit more optimistic because I work with so many gold and silver companies that have influences with the Trump administration. I find myself yelling at the TV. I'm like, Trump, what are you doing? Like, no, you don't want to lower interest rates. What are you doing, man? I'm like, you should know about economics. But he does love gold. He has gold toilets, gold, planes.
When you last met with him in the White House, did you say, what do you think of ending the Fed? Not firing Powell, but just ending the Fed. What did he say to you when you asked him this question?
Well, I haven't met with him yet. But if I did.
If you did meet with him and you asked him, what do you think of Ron? The joke is Tom Woods, whom we all love and admire, he likes to admit that he told the Ron Paul campaign, the dumbest idea is to have a slogan, end the Fed. You'll put people to sleep with that idea. And Tom Woods said, I was never more wrong than then. I hope I don't say anything more stupid than that in the future. Somehow or other, Ron Paul said, end the Fed, and that meant that millions of people were voting for him. So therefore, you should say, Ron Paul seemed to be very successful with that campaign. So next time he invites you, please talk to him about that.
Will do. I'll make sure I say that. But no, I am a little hopeful, right? He pushed the idea at the Bitcoin conference 2024 of reevaluating gold to the market rate to buy more Bitcoin, to create a strategic reserve. I don't like that, because you're just going to create more currency, right? What they're going to do is reevaluate, make more treasuries, create more dollars, and just create this, cause a problem. It's just a way to balance out the GDP to debt ratio, right? Now you're knocking off some of that GDP to debt ratio, strengthening the dollar. But I don't think he's on the wrong path. I think instead of buying Bitcoin, he just backs the treasuries with gold and limit the amount. There needs to be a limit of how much imaginary money they print, because you're just stealing the people's wealth. Back then, we hoped, and it was true, that we would only print enough currency notes based on the amount of gold and silver that we had in the treasury vaults. I get modern monetary theorists and Keynesian economists think that you need to print more currency for spending as the population increases. I think it's ridiculous.
Please call it modern monetary tyranny.
Yes.
Is what these people want. That's what MMT stands for. They have their heads up their asses.
Yes.
Excuse my language. And it gets to be, although it is interesting, Bob Murphy has pointed out that we Austrians, of course, are uniquely equipped to address the modern monetary tyrannical people, and so we talk about it a lot. We give them too much attention. But indeed, if anybody believes in MMT, then unfortunately you're being gulled for the oldest folklore, the most dangerous myth in the world, that government should have the power to print money. That's a basic and most fundamental principle of freedom. That government. Yeah. I would rather they dominate the shoe business. The shoes will pinch. We can still make sandals maybe occasionally. Yeah. Put them in the shoe business. Get them out of the money business.
Yeah, the government needs to be out of the money business.
And in the shoe business.
In the shoe business too. But gold and silver is fantastic, like the Constitution, of restraining the power of government. And if we pass something that restrains the U.S. government, a balanced budget would be nice, right? It would be nice to finally balance the budget like Milei did in Argentina, which will create a deflationary event. But we won't destroy the dollar right away. We won't see a true sound money economy right away. we had this talk, Eric and I, at dinner last night, that the libertarian movement is different from the Republicans. Libertarian movements here at the Free State Project have a generational mindset, like the Chinese. You guys are incrementally taking over this state, and I love it. And that's the entire liberty movement. The Republicans and the libertarians need to have that mindset, because we're not Marxists. We're not going to create violent revolution on monetary policy anytime soon, and we shouldn't, because that will create upheaval and death and war. But we should change people's minds. The war and the battle is education. We have 2 generations of people that have lived under a fiat economy. And I looked at trying to get a PhD in the Austrian School of Economics, and I could only find 5 universities in the planet that has that program. All the others are Keynesian economists or Fabian economists, and it's very difficult. So where we got to start is incrementally change policy through the states, through the federal government, and then educate the masses. Because if we educate the people, they're not going to be duped, and they'll actually understand why their paycheck is not going as far this year as it did last year.
So we're almost out of time. So who would like the last word? Joel.
I'll lightning round it really quick.
All right.
I do have a certain amount of hope that things will get better under Trump, but for very limited reasons. And a couple of things are, the worst part about money printing isn't that it's being printed and you're losing value, it's that you have to have the dollars and you have to be subjected to that. Now, I don't have dollars. However, every time I use my not dollars, a portion of that is a portion of the inflation I escape is still owed to the government through capital gains. And 2 big things that have been talked about that I would really love to see, and I think it might be realistic to see some reform in the next few years. One is a de minimis exemption from capital gains, because for small purchases, it's not the money the government gets. The paperwork really disincentivizes people from using non-dollar units of account to trade. And so having that kind of exemption for like smaller transactions, like $600 or less or something like that, would really help other people to escape holding dollars. And then Trump himself has also talked about a complete capital gains exemption for made in America cryptos, whatever the hell that means. But if there's a target there, people can find definitional ways or start companies that tokenize, for example, gold and silver that are built in the US. And then if the price of the token goes up or down when they spend it, then they're exempt from the difference in the tanking fiat. Those 2 things could very well happen in the next few years, and they would be monumentally helpful in helping people escape fiat money printing on an actual individual level.
All right. Well, that's going to have to be it. Thank you. Let's give a round of applause to our panel.